Snowflakes swirled outside the windows of a small cafe, reminding Mary of the magical fairy tales she had read as a child. But fairy tales were the last thing on her mind. The past few months had been the hardest her establishment had ever faced. Revenues had plummeted, customers visited less and less, and bills piled up like snowdrifts on the streets of Chicago. Mary ran her hand across the old wooden counter, feeling its rough surface. This counter had witnessed countless stories, romantic dates, lively celebrations, and sometimes even the quiet tears of loneliness wiped away over a cup of coffee. She loved her cafe, but there were moments when it seemed like she no longer had the strength to fight for it. Suddenly, the bell on the door jingled. Mary instinctively looked up. A man stood in the doorway. His tall figure seemed to blend with the gray winter sky. His worn-out coat looked as though it hadn't known warmth in ages, and his boots were caked with snow and mud. But what struck her the most were his eyes. They were filled with exhaustion, as if this man carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. He hesitated for a moment, as if unsure whether to come in. His discomfort was evident. His hands trembled from the cold, his face was gaunt, and he barely seemed able to stand. Without hesitation, Mary gave him a warm smile and gestured invitingly. "Please, have a seat," she said, her voice as soft as a warm blanket. "I'll make you something right away." The man took a step forward, then another, as if each movement was an effort. He sat down at a table by the window, placing his hands on the cracked surface. While he tried to warm up, Mary swiftly lit the stove and set a pot of chicken broth to simmer. She chopped vegetables, added spices, and soon the kitchen was filled with a comforting aroma that made her cafe special. While the soup cooked, she pulled out a loaf of freshly baked bread from the oven, still warm and crispy. Every now and then, she glanced at the man. He sat motionless, staring out the window. His gaze was empty, yet it carried a profound sadness. When everything was ready, Mary brought him a tray with hot soup, a slice of bread, and a cup of tea. She placed it before him with a gentle smile. "Here, this should warm you up," she said. He lifted his head and looked at her with an expression that made her heart ache. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice hoarse and barely audible. "You're welcome," she replied, taking a seat at the neighboring table. Sometimes a warm meal is all it takes to get through an evening like this. The man picked up the spoon and began to eat slowly, as if afraid the moment might vanish. Mary watched him silently, feeling her heart fill with warmth. "This is a cozy place," he said quietly after a while. "Thank you. It's not very big, but I try to make everyone feel at home." The man paused for a moment, then looked up at her. "You didn't even ask if I could pay," he said with a trace of amazement. Mary smiled. On nights like this, helping matters more than counting money. He nodded silently, then unexpectedly added, "You are an extraordinary woman." His words were so genuine that Mary felt a slight flush of embarrassment. She looked away, as if the aromas of the kitchen had suddenly become overwhelming. When he finished his meal, he thanked her again. She wanted to learn more about him, but he simply smiled, said goodbye, and disappeared into the cold night, leaving behind a warmth that lingered in her cafe long after he was gone. A few months later, one morning, Mary stood by her bedroom window, watching the first rays of sunlight break through the gray sky. A new day meant new responsibilities. She needed to draft a list of suppliers, check ingredient stocks, and figure out ways to attract more customers. As she approached the cafe door, she noticed something unusual. An envelope lay on the steps. Mary frowned as she picked it up. The envelope was thick, white, and had no return address. The only inscription on it read, "For Mary." Her heart raced. She didn't know what to expect, but the feeling that it was connected to the visitor from that night was almost tangible. Once inside, with the door securely closed behind her, she carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written in clear, neat handwriting. "Dear Mary, a few months ago, you did something that many wouldn't have done. You showed kindness and compassion without expecting anything in return. In a world that sometimes lacks warmth, your gesture was a true miracle for me. Your care reminded me that kindness has the power to change lives. Once, I had everything, but circumstances took it all away. I didn't want to burden you with my story because sometimes words fail to convey the depth of a situation. However, I want you to know that your act of kindness inspired me. Please accept this gift. Let it help you and your cafe. You deserve for your hard work and kindness to bring joy not just to you but to those around you. With sincere gratitude. The Stranger. Mary's hands trembled as she finished reading. But her astonishment peaked when a check fell out of the envelope. She picked it up and froze, unable to believe her eyes. The amount on the check was staggering. This wasn't just money, it was a chance. A chance to pay off the cafe's debts, replace old equipment, and maybe even invest a little in growth. Her heart was overwhelmed with emotion. Who was he? Why had he done this? Questions raced through her mind, but there were no answers. The man had remained anonymous, and his gesture only highlighted how extraordinary the situation was. The entire day, Mary felt like she was in a fog. She showed the check to her best friend and accountant, Joe. After examining it, Joe let out a low whistle. "This is no joke," he said, verifying the details. "The money is real." "But I don't even know who he is, Joe," she murmured, fidgeting with the corner of the letter. "It feels so strange." "Sometimes, good deeds come back to us in the most unexpected ways," Joe smiled. "Take this as a sign that you're on the right path." Despite everything, Mary couldn't stop thinking about the man. She replayed the events of that evening over and over in her mind, trying to understand what might have prompted him to make such a generous gesture. The next morning, another letter lay on one of the cafe's tables. It wasn't as long but contained just one sentence. "If you want to know more, be ready for the next step." There was no signature. Mary stared at the letter lying before her for a long time. Questions swirled in her mind. What was the next step? Who was leaving these letters? Why was this happening to her? She sighed and slipped the letter into her pocket, deciding to focus on the cafe for now. The morning hours were usually quiet, but today she felt especially alert. Regular customers couldn't help but notice her pensive demeanor. "Is everything all right, Mary?" asked Mrs. Bailey, an elderly woman who stopped by every day for her cup of coffee. "Yes, Mrs. Bailey," Mary replied with a smile. "Just a strange morning, that's all." The day went on as usual, but thoughts of the letter lingered. The mysterious gift seemed incredible, almost unreal. Her faith in people had grown, but so had her curiosity. Late in the evening, after closing the cafe, Mary found another envelope in the mailbox. This one was thicker, containing not just a letter but an ornate card embossed with golden details. The card held an invitation. "You are cordially invited to a private dinner. Tomorrow, 7 p.m., at La Lumière. Present this invitation at the entrance. It's important. Sincerely, The Stranger." Mary read the text over and over until she was sure she wasn't mistaken. La Lumière was one of the most prestigious restaurants in the city. She'd only heard about it from customers who occasionally discussed its exquisite cuisine and sky-high prices. Her heart fluttered with excitement. This was so strange, so unusual. "What if it's a trap?" she mused aloud, sitting on her couch. But something inside her, a feeling she couldn't quite explain, told her she had to go. The stranger had done so much for her, and she couldn't just ignore it. The next day, Mary spent an hour choosing an outfit. Her wardrobe had nothing that matched the level of the restaurant, but she settled on the best she had, a modest black dress and simple heels. Her curly dark hair was styled in a loose bun, and her makeup was minimal, just enough to enhance her natural beauty. When she arrived at the restaurant, she paused before its grand doors. Through the glass windows, she could see marble floors, golden lighting, and tables adorned with crystal glasses. "Deep breath, Mary," she told herself before stepping inside. At the entrance, she showed the card to the hostess, an elegantly dressed young woman who nodded and led her through the dining room. "Your table is in a private room, miss." Mary's nerves heightened as she followed the hostess. When the door opened, she saw a small, cozy table set for two. Waiting there was the very man she had helped on that cold night. Now, he looked entirely different. His hair was neatly trimmed, and a tailored suit exuded confidence, something he clearly hadn't possessed during their first meeting. Smiling, he stood up. "Thank you for coming, Mary," he said. Mary stopped at the threshold, still a bit stunned. "It's you?" He nodded, gesturing toward the chair. "I understand this all seems strange. Please sit, and I'll explain everything." Mary sat across from him, her heart pounding. "My name is Jonathan," he began. "We met before, but back then I was at the lowest point of my life. I had lost everything: my business, my resources, my faith in people. But you," he paused, looking her directly in the eyes. "You gave me hope." Mary listened intently, unsure of what to say. "What you did for me that night can't be measured in money. But I want to repay you, not just with financial support, but in any way I can." "Why?" she asked quietly. Jonathan smiled. "Because people like you are rare." At that moment, the door opened again, and another man stepped into the room. His striking green eyes immediately drew Mary's attention. "Sorry for being late," he said. "I'm Michael, Jonathan's son." Michael took a seat at the table, his smile as warm as his father's, but his eyes held a hint of reserved caution. He studied Mary intently, as though quietly assessing her. "Nice to meet you, Mary," he began. "My father has told me a lot about you." "Really?" Mary glanced at Jonathan in surprise. "Yes," Jonathan confirmed. "That night was a turning point for me. Until then, I thought the world had lost all kindness. Then you showed me that there are still people willing to help a complete stranger." Mary blushed, unsure how to respond to such words. "I just did what I thought was right," she murmured. "And that's what makes you special," Michael said with a soft smile. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, watching her closely. "After that night, I found the strength to reconnect with old friends, rebuild relationships, and, most importantly, start over. It wasn't easy, but remembering your gesture gave me the courage to be strong and bold." "That's incredible," Mary whispered. "But why tell me all this? Why do you want to help me?" Jonathan leaned forward, his tone turning serious. "Because I know how hard it is to be on the edge. I know what it means to fight every day, unsure if you have the strength to go on. And if anyone deserves help, it's you." He opened a small leather folder and placed it on the table in front of Mary. "This is a plan," he said. "We want to invest in your cafe. New equipment, a small renovation, and a program that will turn your cafe into more than just a business. It will become a community hub." Mary cautiously opened the folder. Inside were sketches of a redesigned interior, a list of new equipment, and a proposed budget. Her head spun. This is too much. "I can't accept this," she stammered, struggling to find the words. "Why not?" Michael interjected. "You helped us without knowing who we were. Now it's our turn to help you." Mary looked at him, seeing genuine sincerity in his eyes. But doubts gnawed at her. "What's the catch?" she finally asked. "Only one thing," Jonathan replied. "Let your cafe become a place where anyone can find support. We want part of the proceeds to go toward free meals for those in need." Mary froze. The idea resonated deeply with her. Her heart swelled with emotion but also with fear. "That's a huge responsibility," she murmured. "And you can handle it," Michael said confidently. "You have the strength to change not just your own life, but the lives of others as well." She looked down at the folder, her eyes welling up with tears. "This could change everything," she whispered. Jonathan nodded. "That's exactly what we want." Mary thought for a few moments, then slowly lifted her gaze. "All right. I'll do it." Jonathan smiled, and Michael clapped his hands together. "Perfect. Let's get to work." In just a few weeks, Mary's cafe had transformed beyond recognition. The design team brought in by Jonathan had worked wonders. The space was now bright, cozy, and inspiring. Wooden tables with carved edges, soft sofas, and armchairs in muted tones created an inviting atmosphere, urging guests to linger. On one wall, a large wishing board allowed visitors to leave warm words or drawings. But the true heart of the new cafe wasn't its decor, it was its mission. Behind the counter, a beautiful logo now read, "Cafe of Hope," with the words below, "A place where everyone finds warmth and support." Every day, Mary entered the cafe with a sense of awe. She knew her establishment had become more than just a place to serve coffee and food. It was now a beacon of kindness, inspired by her own story. On the day of the grand reopening, Mary stood in front of a mirror in the back room, nervously adjusting her light apron. Outside, a crowd had already gathered. Regulars, friends, neighbors, and even those who had heard about the cafe through the news and recommendations. "Ready?" came a voice behind her. She turned to see Michael, standing in a pristine chef's jacket, looking completely at ease. "I think so," she said, taking a deep breath. "You'll be great," he assured her with a smile. Outside, the cafe buzzed with music and the lively chatter of guests. Jonathan greeted each person warmly, his firm handshake and genuine smile quickly winning people over. "Thank you for coming to support us," he said repeatedly. Mary stepped out to greet the crowd and was met with countless familiar faces. Mrs. Bailey, who always ordered tea, sat at a table with new friends. A young couple with a child eagerly browsed the new menu, while a man with a cane had already settled at the kindness table in the corner. "Good evening, sir," Mary said softly, approaching him. "What can I get for you?" He looked at her in surprise. "Really? For free?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Of course," she smiled. "We want everyone to feel at home here." The man's eyes welled up as Mary brought him a bowl of hot soup and a slice of freshly baked bread. "Thank you," he said, clasping her hand. "This means more than you know." Meanwhile, the cafe buzzed with joy. At the center of attention was Michael, who had prepared a tasting menu of his signature dishes. Guests lined up to try his creations, and each one left delighted. "This guy's a true chef," one patron exclaimed. "Where did you find him?" Jonathan, overhearing, couldn't help but beam with pride. "He's my son," he said. "And it looks like he's here to stay." As the evening wound down, Mary stood behind the counter, watching as guests left the cafe and Michael cleared the last dishes in the kitchen. Exhaustion mingled with a profound sense of fulfillment. "It went perfectly," Michael said, approaching her. "Yes, but I couldn't have done it without you," Mary admitted, glancing at Jonathan, who was still chatting with guests near the door. The next day, their joy was overshadowed by troubling news. A nearby cafe owner, envious of Mary's success, had begun spreading rumors that her charity program was just a marketing ploy and that the money funding it had been acquired dishonestly. Michael was the first to learn of it, spotting comments on social media. "Have you seen this?" he asked, walking into Mary's office with his laptop. She nodded, her expression somber. "Yes. But what can I do? People will always talk." Michael shook his head. "You can prove them wrong. Let's host an open day. Show everyone how the cafe operates so there's no room for doubt." The idea was brilliant. During the open day, visitors could tour the kitchen, talk with staff, volunteer at the kindness table, and even try their hand at cooking. The atmosphere was so heartwarming that even the most skeptical guests left with smiles. The event solidified the reputation of Cafe of Hope. People began speaking of it not as a trendy spot, but as a true center of kindness and support. That evening, Mary sat at the counter with a cup of tea, watching Michael tidy up the last tables. "We did it," she said, gratitude evident in her voice. "No, you did it," Michael corrected, sitting across from her. Mary smiled, feeling her heart fill with warmth. Over the next few months, Cafe of Hope evolved into more than just a place to eat. It became a hub for connection and support. Guests left their stories, advice, and even offers to help others on the wishing board. Some volunteered their skills for free, from repairs to tutoring children. Michael proved indispensable not only as the cafe's head chef but also as a source of ideas. His culinary creations, like sage-infused pumpkin soup or lavender lemon cake, became the cafe's signature dishes, drawing in more and more visitors. "You realize the line will soon stretch around the block?" Jonathan joked, watching Michael prepare another order. "If that happens, we'll need to expand," Michael replied with a grin. Mary laughed, though a shadow of doubt flickered in her eyes. "Expand? That's a bold move. I'm not even sure I can handle what we've got now." "You're handling it," Michael said firmly, meeting her gaze. "You're stronger than you think." Not everyone was happy with Mary's success. Carl, the owner of a rival cafe, had already tried to tarnish her reputation with rumors. Now, he took things further by reporting her to the tax authorities, hoping to disrupt her operations. "Is this Carl again?" Michael asked, reading the inspection notice. Mary nodded, feeling drained. "Yes. He won't stop until he tears it all down." "Then we won't let him," Jonathan said. "Michael, you're up." Together, the three devised a strategy. Jonathan met with lawyers to prepare all necessary documents for the inspection, ensuring transparency in the cafe's operations. Meanwhile, Michael invited local media to showcase the cafe's charitable work. On the day of the inspection, officials meticulously reviewed every detail. Jonathan calmly answered their questions, while Michael guided journalists through the cafe, highlighting the kindness table and explaining how the cafe supported the homeless and those in need. Mary braced herself for the worst, but by the end of the day, the inspectors announced they had no issues. "Your work deserves respect, miss," one of them said, shaking her hand. The next day, articles about the cafe appeared in local newspapers. One headline read, "How Kindness Overcomes Doubt, the Story of Cafe of Hope." Carl attempted to defend himself, but his reputation took a hit, and customers began avoiding his cafe. That evening, Michael made an unexpected announcement. "I want to stay," he said over dinner as they discussed future plans. Mary looked at him in surprise. "But your career?" "You're a renowned chef. Your dishes belong in five-star restaurants." "I don't need fame anymore," Michael replied. "Here, I feel like I'm doing something real. Something that matters." Jonathan smiled quietly. "It's your choice, son. And I'm proud of you." Mary couldn't hide her smile. "Then you'll have to put up with me for a lot longer." Michael chuckled. "It'll be worth it." Together, they decided not only to continue their work but also to launch a new program. Monthly community dinners for the homeless, where everyone could feel like part of a family. Soon, Cafe of Hope became a symbol of kindness and unity. People came not just for the food but for inspiration, leaving their stories and ideas for change. That evening, after the last guests had left, Mary, Michael, and Jonathan sat together at a table, cups of hot tea in hand. "We've created something special," Mary said, gazing at the warmly lit space. "We?" Jonathan asked with a raised eyebrow. "This all started with you." Michael smiled. "Now it's our story." Mary felt her heart swell with gratitude. A simple act of kindness on a cold winter night had not only changed her life but the lives of so many others. A few months later, Cafe of Hope was no longer just a popular spot. It had become a true landmark in Chicago. People visited not only for the delicious food but also for the warmth, kindness, and inspiration it offered. In the evenings, the cafe hosted events for artists, literary gatherings, and even free cooking workshops led by Michael. This growing success culminated in a major milestone, the grand opening of a new hall within the cafe, dedicated entirely to charity. The space was designed as a sanctuary where those in need could receive hot meals, support, and even assistance in finding employment. The opening drew dozens of guests, including locals, partners, and journalists. A banner at the entrance read, "Cafe of Hope, where change begins." Jonathan, Michael, and Mary stood near the stage. After a round of enthusiastic applause, Jonathan was the first to take the microphone. "Today, I want to thank everyone who believed in us and supported us," he began. "But most of all, I want to thank one person. Someone whose kindness changed my life. Mary, your faith in people inspired me to be better. And I'm sure I'm not the only one." Mary stepped up to the microphone amid loud applause. Her heart raced, but in that moment she felt only gratitude. "Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Michael. And thank you to everyone here tonight. If someone had told me a year ago that all of this would become reality, I wouldn't have believed it. It all started with a small act of kindness. But that act reminded me that by helping one person, we can transform the world around us." She paused, glancing at the audience. Cafe of Hope isn't just about food. It's about seeing the humanity in each other. It's about reaching out a helping hand. And it's about creating something bigger together. The room erupted in applause. The evening concluded with dinner for all the guests. Michael prepared one of his signature dishes, and at the kindness table, guests shared stories of how the cafe had already changed lives. Later, after everyone had left, Mary, Michael, and Jonathan remained in the empty cafe. The soft lighting cast a warm glow on their faces, and outside, the season's first snow fell. "Do you think we've done enough?" Mary asked, leaning on the counter. Michael smirked. "Enough? We're just getting started." Jonathan nodded. "There are so many people out there waiting for a place like this." Mary smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. "Then let's keep going." As they locked the cafe doors, snow blanketed Chicago's streets, a gentle reminder that every winter carries the promise of a new dawn.